In 1963, in Anderson, Indiana, a factory town that built electrical parts for half of Detroit, there was a mechanic who could take a tired, stumbling engine and, in an afternoon, make it idle so smooth a nickel would stand on end on the air cleaner. People drove in from 3 counties for one of his tune-ups. They thought he had a gift. He did not. He had a ritual, a sequence of small, exact adjustments done in a precise order, each read off the engine itself, and an understanding that a tune-up was never a bag of new parts thrown at a motor. It was a conversation with the engine, and it had rules. That is number 1. But it began with something as simple as reading the old spark plugs, and that is number 25. Here is the truth the whole ritual was built on. An engine at a tune-up is not a checklist of separate parts. It is one system of settings that lean on each other: the spark, the dwell, the timing, the mixture, the valve lash, and moving any one moves the others. Set the dwell, and you have changed the timing. Set the timing, and you have changed the idle. That is why a tune-up was an order and not a list, done in sequence, mechanical first, then spark, then fuel, each step confirmed before the next. The scan tool did not kill this because the ritual failed. It killed it because electronic ignition, fuel injection, and the engine computer took the adjustments out of a man's hands. Number 12 is the valve adjustment almost everyone skipped, the quiet half-hour that decided whether an engine ran tight at 200,000 miles or burned a valve at 90. Number 25 is reading the old plugs like a doctor reads a chart, and number 1 is the order, the sequence the Anderson mechanic followed every time, the thing that separated a real tune-up from a parts swap, and the reason his engines sang. These were never tricks. They were craft, learned over 1,000 engines in an age when a car was tuned by a man's hands and ears and not by a plug in the dash. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 25 lost tune-up secrets old American mechanics took to the grave. Number 25, reading the old spark plugs before you touched a thing. The engine's written confession. Before you removed a part, you pulled the old plugs and read them. A tan or gray tip meant that cylinder ran right. Black and sooty meant rich. White and blistered meant lean and too hot. Wet and oily meant oil was getting in. A mechanic in 1963 laid the old plugs out in firing order because the color and deposits record each cylinder's mixture, temperature, and health, and told him where to look before he turned a wrench. The Anderson mechanic read a set of plugs the way a doctor reads a chart. The plug was not just a part, it was a letter the engine wrote about itself. Number 24. Checking the compression before you tuned a thing. The baseline. No adjustment could fake. You ran a compression test across the cylinders first because no tune-up ever cured a mechanical fault. If a cylinder was down from a burnt valve or worn rings, no spark or mixture would bring it back, and tuning around it only hid the truth. A mechanic in 1963 checked compression before he sold a man a tune-up because it is the mechanical health the whole tune sits on, and it was dishonest to tune an engine that needed a valve job. The Anderson mechanic never tuned over a dead cylinder and said so plainly. The gauge did not tune the engine. It told him whether it was worth tuning. Number 23. Gapping every new plug by hand. The few thousandths that decided the spark. You gapped each new plug to the exact factory figure with a wire gauge, bending the side electrode a hair until the blade dragged just right. A plug from the box was rarely at spec, and a wrong gap weakened the spark and roughened the idle. A mechanic in 1963 gapped every plug on the bench because the gap sets the length of the spark, and a few thousandths wrong at each plug multiplied into a whole engine running poorly. The Anderson mechanic checked the gap on every plug, even new ones. The gap was not a detail. It was the size of the fire in every cylinder. Number 22. Choosing the right heat range. The plug matched to the engine's life. You picked not just a plug, but the right heat range for how the car was driven, because one that ran too cold fouled with deposits, and one too hot invited trouble, and a wise man adjusted for a car that idled in town or ran hard on the highway. The Anderson mechanic in 1963 knew the heat ranges by heart because the range governs how fast the tip sheds heat, and the wrong one fouled a good engine in a month. The plug was not one size, it was fitted like a shoe to a foot.
Before we go on, I made something special for you. A guide for men like us, who still believe a man should be able to keep his own car running. It's the Forgotten Mechanic's Handbook, the old-fashioned car repair secrets our grandfathers used to fix any engine and keep it running for decades. But these skills are disappearing fast, and once they're gone for good. Don't pay another mechanic ever again. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link below. Go ahead, I'll wait right here.
Number 21. Inspecting the plug wires for the spark that leaked away. The hidden misfire in the dark. You checked the plug wires for cracks, brittleness, and the faint blue crawl of spark leaking to ground, best seen with the hood up on a dark night. A wire bleeding its fire to the block stole power and smoothness no adjustment could give back. A mechanic in 1963 ran his hand along the wires in the dark and watched for the little arcs, because cracked insulation lets thousands of volts jump to ground instead of firing the plug. The Anderson mechanic replaced tired wires before chasing any ghost in the ignition. The wire did not look broken. It only leaked its fire where no one could see. Number 20. Cleaning and reading the cap and rotor, the dust of 1,000 dead sparks. You pulled the distributor cap and rotor and read them for gray carbon tracks, corroded terminals, and the fine dust 1,000 sparks leave. A cracked cap or burned rotor scattered the spark, and a carbon track was a short waiting for a damp morning. The Anderson mechanic, in 1963, inspected the cap inside and out because it routes the spark to each cylinder, and any crack or carbon path bled it away, stranding a car in the first hard rain. The cap was not just a cover, it was the switchboard the spark ran through. Number 19. Setting the points gap, then confirming the dwell. The heart of the old ignition. You set the breaker points to the factory gap with a feeler gauge to get close, then started the engine and confirmed it with a dwell meter until the needle sat on the number. The points were the switch that fired the coil, and their gap decided how long it charged for every spark. A mechanic in 1963 set gap and dwell as one job, because dwell is the degrees the points stay closed to charge the coil, and it set the strength of every spark. The Anderson mechanic trusted the feeler to get close and the dwell meter to make it exact. The points were not a small part. They were the beating heart of the ignition. Number 18. Greasing the distributor cam, the dab that held the setting for a year. You put the smallest dab of grease on the distributor cam where the point's rubbing block rode so it would not wear away, and let the gap close over the months. Skip it, and the gap tightened, the dwell drifted, and the timing wandered with it. The Anderson mechanic, in 1963, never closed a distributor without that touch of grease, Because the rubbing block rides the spinning cam and run dry, it wears down and closes the gap, untuning the engine itself. The grease was not an extra. It was what made the setting last. Number 17. Replacing the condenser with the points. The quiet partner nobody thanked. You always put in a fresh condenser when you changed the points because the two worked as a pair. The condenser absorbed the surge each time the points opened, and a weak one let them arc and burn, killing a fresh set in weeks. A mechanic in 1963 never reused an old condenser with new points because it soaks up the voltage spike that would otherwise arc across them, and a weak one burns a fresh set in weeks. The Anderson mechanic changed the condenser with the points every time. The condenser was never the star. It was the quiet partner that kept the points alive. Here is the part that stings, because this ritual did not fade the way others did. It was ended, and for real reasons. Beginning in the mid-1970s, American car makers threw out the breaker points for electronic ignition, and in one stroke half of this list was gone. No points, no condenser, no dwell to set. Through the 1980s, the carburetor followed, replaced by fuel injection that metered the mixture by computer better than any hand on a screw. And in 1996, the onboard diagnostic computer became the law of the land, and the tune-up turned from a ritual read off the engine into a data port read off a screen. None of it was a conspiracy. The new way ran cleaner, started better, and held its tune for 100,000 miles. But something real was lost, a whole craft of the hands and the ear, and the men who carried it aged out while the machines that replaced them hummed along, needing no one. Number 16. Dressing the points contacts, the old-timer's touch that saved a set. When the points had light buildup but life left in them, you dressed the contact faces with fine emery or a points file, cleaning them flat and true. It was a frugal man's trick from a time when you saved what you could, and it bought a set of points more good miles. The Anderson mechanic, in 1963, kept a points file in his box because a light dressing of the contact faces removed the pitting and film that raise resistance and weaken the spark. The file was not about being cheap. It was about knowing what could be saved. Number 15. Freeing the mechanical advance. The weights that gave the engine its legs. You checked the mechanical advance, the little weights on springs that swung out as the engine sped up and advanced the spark. Gummed or stuck, they left the engine flat and gutless up high, and no other setting could give that power back. The Anderson mechanic in 1963 twisted the rotor by hand to feel the weights move and snap back, because the advance moves the spark earlier as speed climbs, and a seized one left the engine gutless up high. The weights were hidden, but they were the legs the engine ran on. Number 14. Checking the vacuum advance, the diaphragm that saved the gas. You tested the vacuum advance, the canister that added timing under light cruise to save fuel, by drawing on its line and watching the plate inside move and hold. A ruptured diaphragm meant the timing never advanced on the highway, and the car drank gas and ran hot. The Anderson mechanic, in 1963, checked the vacuum advance with a hand pump, because it adds timing during light cruise to save fuel, and a torn one left an engine thirsty and hot for no clear reason. The little canister was easy to ignore. It was the difference at every gas pump. Number 13. Setting the timing by light, with the advance unplugged. The last and most exact step of all. With the engine warm, you clipped a timing light to the number 1 wire, disconnected and plugged the vacuum advance, and turned the distributor until the mark on the balancer lined up with the exact figure on the tab. Timing was set last, always, because everything before it moved it. A mechanic in 1963 set the timing dead last, and by the book, because it fires the spark a precise instant before the piston tops, and it must come after the dwell, which shifts it. The Anderson mechanic set the timing last, vacuum unplugged to the exact degree. The timing was not one more step. It was the keystone all the others led to. Number 12. Adjusting the valve lash. The half hour almost everyone skipped. You set the clearance between the valve stems and rockers with a feeler gauge, warm or cold, as the manual said. Too tight, and a valve could not close and burned away. Too loose, and the Valvetrain hammered itself to pieces. It was slow work, and the step the lazy left undone. A mechanic in 1963 set the lash on every valve, because that gap lets the Valvetrain expand as it heats, so too tight burned the valve and too loose pounded the parts. The Anderson mechanic set every valve to specification, though it added an hour. The lash was invisible and thankless. It was also the difference between an engine that lasted and one that did not. Number 11. Replacing the AIR filter, the lung the engine breathed through. You put in a fresh air filter because an engine breathes far more air than fuel, and a filter choked with a season of dust starved it and richened the mixture. It was the simplest step on the list, and a shocking number of engines ran for years behind a filter black with grime. The Anderson mechanic, in 1963, held the old filter up to a light because it cleans all the air the engine draws, and a clogged one starved it and dragged down power and economy together. The filter was cheap and dull. It was the only breath the engine got. Number 10. Replacing the fuel filter, the guard on the carburetor's door. You changed the fuel filter, the small guard that kept rust and grit from the tank out of the carburetor's fine passages. Left too long, it starved the engine at speed, a stumble that sent many a man chasing the ignition when the trouble was a $1 filter. The Anderson mechanic in 1963 changed the fuel filter on schedule because it traps grit before the carburetor, and a clogged one starved the engine under load. A stumble men blamed on the spark. The filter was a small thing. It stood guard on the whole fuel supply. Here is the part of his story worth telling. The Anderson mechanic did not invent his ritual. He learned it from an old tuner who would not let him touch a distributor for a year, only watch and read plugs and hand over tools. The old man taught him the sequence the hard way, making him say each step and why it came where it did, until the order was burned in. "It is not the parts," the old man told him. "Any fool can put in parts. It is the order and listening to what the engine tells you after each one." Then one day the boy tuned an engine alone, in the right order, reading it as he went, and it settled into an idle so smooth the old man just nodded because the boy had stopped swapping parts and started tuning. Number 9. Servicing the PCV valve, the small valve that kept the crankcase clean. You checked and replaced the PCV valve, the one-way valve that drew vapors out of the crankcase to be burned. Stuck shut, it let pressure and sludge build. Stuck open, it upset the idle. A 2-minute step folded into every proper tune-up. The Anderson mechanic in 1963 shook the old valve to feel it rattle because it vents crankcase vapors at a metered rate, and a dead one let sludge build below or leaned the idle above. The valve was small and cheap. It kept the whole crankcase breathing clean. Number 8. Setting the curb idle. The steady beat the whole car rode on. With the engine warm and the choke fully off, you set the curb idle to the specified figure, not too high to lurch, not too low to stall at a light. It was set after the ignition and mixture because both changed where the idle wanted to sit. A mechanic in 1963 set the curb idle by the tash and the sound together because idle speed rides on the timing and mixture already being right, which is why it was set near the end. The Anderson mechanic set the idle to a slow, even heartbeat. The idle was not just a number, it was the pulse the whole car rode on. Number 7. Setting the mixture by the highest steady vacuum. Tuning the fuel by the engine's own pull. You set the idle mixture screws by connecting a vacuum gauge and turning them slowly until the engine pulled its highest, steadiest reading, then backed off a hair to a smooth idle. The engine's own vacuum told you when the mixture was right better than any guess. A mechanic in 1963 tuned the mixture to the highest steady vacuum because at its best mixture an engine pulls its strongest, steadiest vacuum, setting the fuel by its own measure, not by eye. The Anderson mechanic set the mixture by the needle and the sound. The mixture was not set by a chart. It was set by asking the engine and reading its answer. Number 6. Setting the choke and the fast idle. The cold start ritual within the ritual. You set the automatic choke and its fast idle so the engine started rich and idled high when cold, then came off the choke and settled as it warmed. Set wrong, a car flooded on a cold morning or stalled at every stop until it warmed through. A mechanic in 1963 set the choke for the season richer for a hard winter because it enriches the cold mixture and the fast idle carries it until it warms, and a bad one made every frosty dawn a fight. The Anderson mechanic set the choke to start clean on the coldest mornings. The choke was only for the cold minutes, the ones that tried a driver most. Number 5. Checking the float and the accelerator pump. The carburetor's level and its squirt. You checked the float level that set how much fuel stood ready in the bowl, and the accelerator pump that squirted fuel when the throttle snapped open. A wrong float ran the engine rich or lean everywhere, and a tired pump gave a flat spot on every hard press. A mechanic in 1963 watched the pump squirt down the carburetor throat because the float sets the level it meters from and the pump covers the instant of acceleration. Both needed to pull away clean. The Anderson mechanic checked the float and watched the pump shot every time. The carburetor was not a mystery. It was a set of small jobs done right. Number 4. Cleaning out the varnish. Clearing the passages the fuel had gummed. You cleaned the carburetor's tiny passages and jets of the varnish that old fuel leaves, because those holes are the size of a hair, and a clogged jet leaned a circuit no adjustment could reach. Sometimes the fix was not a setting, but a cleaning. A mechanic in 1963 soaked and blew out a gummed carburetor because it meters fuel through hair-fine passages, and varnish in them shifted the mixture no screw could correct. The Anderson mechanic cleared the passages first, then tuned the clean carburetor. The dirt was not a setting to fix. It was a blockage to remove first. Number 3. The road test. The final read the bench could never give. When the shop work was done, you drove the car. You felt for the flat spots, listened for the ping under load, felt whether it pulled clean and idled steady, because a tune-up was not finished on the bench, but on the road. The engine told the last of the truth only when it was working. The Anderson mechanic drove every car he tuned before he gave it back, up through the gears and back, feeling for the one thing the shop had missed, because numbers could set an engine close, but only the driving proved it right. He trusted his gauges to get it close, and his own senses to call it finished. Number 2. Knowing the settings all lean on each other, why you always went back and checked. You understood, deep in the work, that none of these settings stood alone. Set the dwell, and you moved the timing. Set the timing, and you nudged the idle. So after the first pass, you went back and rechecked, because the last adjustment had quietly changed the ones before it. The Anderson mechanic always made a second pass, confirming the dwell, the timing, the idle, and the mixture had settled together, because the engine was a web of settings and pulling one thread moved them all, so he circled back until nothing moved anymore. He did not tune in a straight line. He circled until the engine stopped changing under his hands. Number 1. The order and listening to the engine after each step. The ritual itself. Here it is, the secret under all the rest. A tune-up was a sequence, done in one right order and no other. The mechanical health first, compression and valve lash. Then the ignition, dwell before timing, always, because dwell moves timing. Then the fuel and mixture and idle, which the ignition had just changed. And after every step, you read the engine, its sound, its vacuum, its idle, and let it tell you whether to move on or go back. The Anderson mechanic followed that order every time for 30 years, because the old man had burned it into him that the order was the whole art. Any man could hang new parts on an engine. Only a tuner could bring a dozen interdependent settings into harmony, in sequence, reading the engine's answer at each turn until it sang. That is why a tune-up was a ritual and not a repair. It was fuel, air, and spark brought into balance by a man's hands and ears, one exact step at a time, in an order that could not be broken. Number 1 was never a part or a tool. It was the sequence, the listening, and the patience to do them in order until the engine came alive. None of these secrets was magic. They were a feeler gauge, a timing light, a dwell meter, a vacuum gauge, and a man who understood that an engine is a system of settings that lean on one another, to be balanced in one right order. He read the plugs, set the points, timed the spark, tuned the mixture, and drove the car, and an engine that came in stumbling went out singing. A few dollars of parts and an afternoon of skill gave a family another year of a car that ran like new. Here is what makes it ache. This ritual did not die because it failed. It died because it was replaced, honestly and for real reasons, by electronic ignition that needed no points, by fuel injection that metered better than any hand, by a computer that holds an engine in tune for 100,000 miles and reads its own faults through a port in the dash. The new way is genuinely better in almost every measure, but a craft went with the old way, a way of tuning by hand and ear that lived in the fingers of men like him, and that kind of knowledge does not transfer to a screen. It simply ends when the last pair of hands that held it puts down the tools. We did not lose the tune-up because engines stopped needing balance. Every engine still runs on fuel, air, and spark brought into harmony. The machine just does it now, silently, without a ritual or a man. What we lost was the tuner, the one who could listen to a rough engine, lay his hands on it in the right order, and coax it back into song. We lost the old man in Anderson who would not let a boy touch a distributor for a year, and the boy who learned it was never the parts, it was the order and the listening. He tuned that town's engines for 30 years until the points themselves disappeared, and on his last day, with the new electronic cars already coming in, he set a feeler gauge and a timing light in a young man's hands and told him the order, one step at a time, in case someone ever needed to know it again.